Okay, you send in a bunch of articles about the science of hauntings, and I'm honestly a little creeped out, but also super intrigued. I mean, who knew ghosts could have a scientific explanation?
It's a fascinating blend of science and the supernatural. We're not here to say ghosts don't exist, just to look at how some spooky experiences might actually have a scientific basis.
Exactly. And the key seems to be something you wouldn't expect. Sound. But not just any sound, we're talking about infrasound.
Think of it like this. Everything has a natural frequency at which it vibrates. You know how some sounds just seem to vibrate in your very core? That's resonance, and our eyeballs are particularly sensitive to it, especially around 19 Hz, which, coincidentally, is often reported in haunted locations.
So, like a dog whistle, but for ghosts? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe not quite. But seriously, this is where it gets really interesting because even though we can't hear infrasound, our bodies can still sense it.
And that's where the spooky effects come in. We're talking chills, anxiety, even visual distortions. The research suggests that certain infrasound frequencies can actually cause our organs to vibrate.
Imagine feeling your heartbeat in your eyeballs. I'm getting a little creeped out just thinking about it. But that makes sense. If your insides are going haywire, no wonder you might think something paranormal is going on.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our bodies can have very real reactions to stimuli that we're not even consciously aware of. And that opens the door to misinterpreting those sensations.
So even if we don't consciously register infrasound, it can still have a very real physical effect on us. It makes you wonder how much of our environment we're not even aware of.
That's a great point. And one specific frequency has really caught the attention of researchers, 18 to 19 hertz. This is the frequency that's often linked to those ghostly apparitions, and it's pretty close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball.
So if my eyes are vibrating because of this ghost frequency, suddenly seeing weird shadows or apparitions doesn't seem so far-fetched.
And that brings us to a pretty compelling story from the world of infrasound research, the case of Vic Tandy.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting. We're talking about a scientist who basically debunked his own ghost.
Exactly. In the early 1980s, Vic Tandy was working in his lab late one night when he started experiencing that classic haunted feeling, a sense of unease, a cold chill, and even got a glimpse of a gray figure out of the corner of his eye.
Spooky stuff. You'd think a scientist would run screaming, but not Tandy. He decided to get to the bottom of it.
And this is where his scientific mind really shines. He started investigating the lab, looking for any possible explanations. Eventually, he discovered that a newly installed extractor fan was emitting a low-frequency hum.
Wait, seriously? That's incredible. Tell me more about that.
Well, it turned out the fan was emitting a frequency of 18.98 hertz, almost exactly the ghost frequency we've been discussing.
Talk about an aha moment.
Indeed. Tandy realized that the infrasound from the fan was the most likely culprit behind his ghostly encounter. He even replicated the experience later, confirming that the infrasound was causing physical effects and optical illusions.
This feels like a movie plot twist. The ghost-busting scientist outsmarted by physics.
It's a fantastic example of how a scientific approach can help us understand seemingly unexplainable phenomena. And it really put infrasound on the map as a potential explanation for some paranormal experiences.
So what you're saying is, if my house suddenly feels haunted, I should probably check for rogue extractor fans before calling the Ghostbusters.
It's always a good first step. But let's not jump to conclusions just yet. While Tandy's experience is compelling, it's important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because infrasound can cause these effects doesn't mean it's the culprit in every single case of a haunting.
Right. We've got to keep an open mind, but also a critical one. So what about those haunted houses everyone's always talking about? Have scientists measured infrasound levels in those places?
They have, and that's where things get even more intriguing. Studies have indeed found higher levels of infrasound in locations that people commonly report as being haunted.
Oh, wow. So it's not just a wacky theory. There's actual data backing this up.
There is, which is why it's such a hot topic in this field. But, and this is where that critical thinking comes in, just because infrasound is present in these locations doesn't necessarily mean it's causing the spooky experiences. There could be other factors at play, or it might be a combination of things working together.
Okay, I get it. It's complicated. So what you're saying is, while infrasound is a really intriguing piece of the puzzle, we shouldn't assume it's the be-all and end-all explanation for every ghost story out there.
Exactly. And in fact, there are a bunch of other scientific explanations for why people might experience what they believe to be paranormal activity.
Ooh, like what? This is where it gets really interesting because we're not just talking about debunking ghosts. We're talking about understanding how our own brains and bodies work.
Precisely. Think about it. Our senses are constantly bombarded with information, and sometimes, especially in unusual circumstances, our brains can misinterpret that information.
Okay, so spill the beans. What are some of these other explanations?
Well, for starters, there's carbon monoxide poisoning. It's a silent killer, but it can also cause hallucinations and feelings of dread, which could easily be mistaken for a paranormal encounter.
Wow, that's terrifying. Always make sure you have working carbon monoxide detectors, folks. It could save your life and your sanity.
Absolutely. Another factor to consider is electromagnetic field fluctuations. Some research suggests that these fluctuations can stimulate the temporal lobe, which is the part of the brain responsible for sensory perception, memory, and language.
So we're talking about actual electromagnetic interference messing with our brains. That's wild.
It's an area that still needs more research, but it makes sense. Our brains operate on electrical impulses, and those can be influenced by external electromagnetic field. Think about how a magnet can disrupt a compass. It's not so far-fetched to think something similar could happen with our brains.
That's a really interesting analogy. It makes you think twice about spending too much time near power lines.
Right. And then, of course, there's the power of our own minds.
You mean like the power of suggestion? If you think a place is haunted, you're more likely to jump at shadows and interpret every creak as a ghostly footstep.
Exactly. Our expectations and beliefs can have a huge impact on how we perceive the world around us, especially when it comes to things that go bump in the night.
So are you saying ghosts are all in our heads?
Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that our minds are complex, and sometimes they try to fill in the blanks with whatever information is available. Add a spooky atmosphere, a few creaky floorboards, and boom, suddenly a logical explanation turns into a ghost story.
I definitely see how that could happen. But what about those times when multiple people experience the same thing? Like, say, a whole group of friends sees a shadowy figure in an old house. Are you saying it's all just mass hysteria?
Not necessarily. Remember how we talked about infrasound affecting our bodies? Well, if a particular location has high levels of infrasound, it could potentially affect multiple people in the same way, leading to shared experiences.
That's chilling. So it could be a combination of environmental factors and our brains trying to make sense of those weird sensations.
Precisely. And let's not forget about other factors that can play a role. Things like sleep deprivation, stress, and even certain medications can also heighten our senses and make us more susceptible to suggestion.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about whether or not ghosts exist. It's about understanding all these other factors that can contribute to these experiences.
Exactly. It's about looking at the bigger picture and considering all the possibilities.
Okay, so we've got infrasound, electromagnetic fields, carbon monoxide, the power of suggestion. Is that everything? Or are there even more explanations for these spooky encounters?
Well, we've covered the main ones from the articles you sent, but there's still a whole other realm of possibilities related to sleep. Think about those times when you're drifting off to sleep and you suddenly feel like someone's watching you, or you hear your name whispered even though you're home alone. Those are called hypnagogic hallucinations, and they can be incredibly vivid and unsettling.
Oh, yeah, I've definitely experienced those. It's like being half awake, half dreaming, and not knowing what's real.
Exactly. And then there's sleep paralysis, which can be even more terrifying.
Sleep paralysis? What's that?
Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, but you can't move or speak. You might even feel like there's something pressing down on your chest, making it hard to breathe. It's like being trapped inside your own body.
Okay, that sounds absolutely terrifying.
It can be, especially if you're already in a heightened state of anxiety or believe that you're in a haunted location. Imagine experiencing sleep paralysis in an old, creaky house. It wouldn't be hard to interpret that experience as something supernatural.
Wow, I can see how all these things could easily be mistaken for a ghostly encounter. So basically what we're learning is, just because something feels spooky or unexplainable doesn't mean it's automatically a ghost.
Exactly. It's like a detective case. You have to consider all the evidence, rule out the possible explanations, and then see what's left. And sometimes, even after all that, you might still have a mystery on your hands.
That's what makes this whole topic so fascinating. It's like science meets mystery. But before we get too caught up in the mystery, let's take a moment to recap what we've learned so far. We've talked about infrasound, electromagnetic fields, Carbon monoxide poisoning, the power of suggestion, sleep-related phenomena.
Don't forget about the fascinating case of Vic Tandy and his self-debunked ghost.
Oh yeah, how could I forget about Vic? He's like the OG Ghostbuster.
But with science, it's pretty clear that there's often a more rational explanation for these spooky experiences than we might initially think.
Absolutely. Our senses can be tricked, our brains can misinterpret information, and our environments can play all sorts of weird tricks on us.
So what does this all mean for our understanding of ghosts? If we can explain away these experiences with science, does that mean ghosts don't exist?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I think it's important to approach this topic with an open mind. While science can offer explanations for many paranormal experiences, it doesn't necessarily rule out the possibility of something more. I like that. It's about finding a balance between skepticism and open-mindedness. So, we shouldn't automatically assume every spooky encounter is a ghost, but we shouldn't dismiss the possibility entirely either.
Exactly. There's still a lot we don't know about the human brain, the universe, and the nature of reality itself. Who's to say what's truly possible?
That's a great point. Just because we can't explain something with our current understanding of science doesn't mean it's impossible. Maybe we just haven't discovered the right tools or theories yet.
And that's what makes this whole field of study so exciting. It's about pushing the boundaries of our knowledge and exploring the unknown.
It's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And when it comes to ghosts and the paranormal, I think there's still a whole lot we don't know.
Absolutely. And that's where the real intrigue lies. It's about embracing the mystery, acknowledging the limits of our understanding, and always remaining curious.
So what you're saying is the next time I feel a chill down my spine or hear a strange noise in the night, I shouldn't just dismiss it as my imagination. I should take a moment to consider the possibilities.
Exactly. It could be infrasound playing tricks on your senses, or it could be something else entirely.
Maybe it's a ghost trying to tell me something. Or maybe it's just my cat knocking things off the shelf again.
Either way, it's a good reminder to stay curious and never stop exploring the mysteries of the world around us.
Well said. Speaking of mysteries, we've talked a lot about the scientific explanations for ghost sightings, but we haven't really delved into the cultural significance of ghost stories. Why are we so drawn to these tales of the supernatural?
That's a fantastic question, and I think it speaks to something deeply human within us. For centuries, cultures all over the world have told stories about ghosts and spirits. These stories have been passed down through generations, shaping our beliefs about life, death, and the afterlife.
It's like these stories are woven into the fabric of our collective consciousness.
Precisely. And while we can analyze them through the lens of science, trying to understand the psychological and physiological factors at play, it's important to remember that these stories also serve a deeper purpose.
They help us make sense of the world around us, to cope with loss and grief, and to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. They're a reflection of our shared humanity, a testament to our enduring fascination with the unknown.
That's such an important reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the science, but we can't forget the human element, the power of stories, and the enduring mystery that surrounds us. And I think that's a perfect segue into what we really wanted to leave you with today. While we've covered a lot of ground, from the science of infrasound to the psychology of perception, there's one aspect of this whole topic that we haven't fully explored yet.
The stories themselves. Because it's not just about debunking or explaining away these experiences, is it? It's about understanding the deeper meaning behind them.
It's like we tell ghost stories to try and understand something bigger than ourselves, something we can't quite grasp.
Exactly. They reflect our deepest fears, our curiosity about what comes after death, and even our hopes for some kind of existence beyond this life. They offer a glimpse into the unknown, and that can be both terrifying and alluring.
It's like that feeling you get when you look up at the stars at night. You feel so small and insignificant, but also kind of connected to something vast and mysterious.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And I think that sense of wonder, that feeling of being connected to something larger than ourselves, is something we're all searching for, whether we realize it or not.
So even if we can explain away some ghost sightings with science, the stories themselves still hold value.
Absolutely. They tell us about our history, our culture, and our shared human experience. Think about all those haunted houses with their tragic pasts, or those ghost stories passed down through generations. They're more than just spooky tales. They're reflections of our collective memory and our attempts to make sense of the world around us.
It's like each story carries a little piece of history and a whole lot of emotion. No wonder they continue to fascinate us, even in our modern scientific age.
Exactly. And yet, sometimes just the act of telling these stories, of sharing these experiences, can be incredibly powerful. It can help us process trauma, cope with grief, and even build stronger connections with each other.
So instead of just trying to debunk or explain away every ghost story, maybe we should also be listening to what these stories are trying to tell us about ourselves and the world we live in.
I think that's a wonderful takeaway. To approach these stories with a sense of curiosity and respect, to acknowledge the human element, and to remember that sometimes the most meaningful answers can't be found in a textbook or a laboratory. Sometimes we have to look to the shadows, to the whispers of the past, to find the truths that truly resonate with us.
That's beautifully said. So the next time you hear a strange noise in the night or feel a cold spot in a room, don't just dismiss it as your imagination. Take a moment to listen to the story that's trying to be told.
Maybe it's the story of a restless spirit, or maybe it's the story of your own subconscious mind trying to process something. Either way, it's a story worth exploring.
And who knows? You might just uncover a fascinating piece of history, gain a deeper understanding of yourself, or even stumble upon a mystery that science can't explain.
That's what makes this whole topic so captivating. It's a reminder that the world is full of wonder, mystery, and endless possibilities.
Well, this deep dive has definitely left me with more questions than answers, but in the best way possible. It's made me realize that sometimes the most rewarding journeys are the ones that take us into the unknown.
Couldn't agree more. It's about embracing the mystery, challenging our assumptions, and never losing that sense of childlike wonder.
Well said. A huge thank you to you for joining us on this fascinating deep dive into the science of ghost frequencies and the enduring power of ghost stories. We hope this episode has inspired you to look at the world around you with a renewed sense of curiosity and wonder.
And remember, the next time you think you've encountered a ghost, don't be afraid to ask, what's the story here?
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the world around us.